Patterson claimed that came to see me a few days after Gregory disappeared. The fact that it was 2 months later, in February. Her car broke down in the neighborhood, and she was in a tow truck with a couple of girlfriends. She said she had stopped by several times previously, but didn't catch me at home. Her testimony was full of falsehoods. That Greg told me he intended to run away. That I asked to beat up on Greg so bad that he had to have stitches in his forehead. That I said I was in the crime syndicate and we would go after the guy. The girl had a great imagination, but, again, I didn't know what they were trying to prove. Kunkel showed her the picture of Gacy, and she identified him. Mrs. Violet Carroll was the next witness. She was the mother of William Carroll, 16, who was reported missing on June 14th, 1976. Her son lived with her, and she had last seen him at about midnight the night before, and had given his dental records to the sheriff's office. She had looked at the state's photo, number 16, and identified it as her son. And Morani brought out in cross-examination, as with previous witnesses, the physical description of the victim. The Carroll boy was muscular because he did a lot of weightlifting. His mother told the jury that he had been reported missing several times previously. Then Morani asked about the kind of people he ran around with, but the state objected to that line of questioning. Mrs. Carroll was ready to answer, but was stopped. The state did not connect me with William Carroll in any way. During one of the many recesses, I asked my attorneys why they weren't bringing out more information about the victims' backgrounds. Morani said it wasn't important. They said they knew that Carroll and many of the other victims were street hustlers, but claimed that Garippo would not allow any of that kind of information to go to the jurors. He said later, "Don't worry." Mrs. Rosemary Zick was next called to the stand. She was the mother of John Allen Zick, reported missing January 21st, 1977. During Sullivan's direct examination, Mrs. Zick said that her son had been living with his girlfriend in an apartment in Chicago, and when he disappeared, he owned a 1971 white Plymouth Satellite. Sullivan showed her Exhibit 17, which she identified as the car's registration. It had been found in his apartment. She testified that he was last seen alive when he left work on January 20th and was reported missing the following day. On December 15th, 1978, the Des Plaines police had asked her if her son had graduated from Maine West High School, in what year, and if he'd had a class ring. She told them yes, and the ring and several other things were missing from his apartment when he disappeared. She identified State's Exhibit 18 as the boy's class ring, and Exhibit 19 as a picture of her son. The state wanted the jury to believe that Zick was living with his girlfriend. Our investigation learned that he lived alone and that he was a transvestite. The questions about the car were asked because it was found in the ownership of Michael Rossi, a PDM employee. The ring had been found in the Summerdale house. Nothing about John Zick's sexual preferences or drug background was allowed to be heard, nor the fact that he was known to be a stage dancer at gay bars. Roger W. Saws took the next stand. He was a friend of John S. Prestige, age 20, who was reported missing on March 18th, 1977. Mr. Egan handled this witness. He asked how long Mr. Saws had known Prestige and about the spelling of his first name. Saw said that the victim spelled his name Jon, and that he had known him for 6 months before he disappeared. Egan asked Saws if he was married, how old he was, and where he met John. Saws answered that he was 40, divorced 8 years, lived alone, and met John when he had first come from Kalamazoo, Michigan. They had become friends, and John lived with Saws for a while. During the last 5 days before his disappearance, John had stayed with Saws in his apartment. On the evening of March 15th, they had gone out, and during the evening, John asked him about Bughouse Square. He told John that it wasn't a very good place to hang around. Egan asked Saws why he said that. Saws answered, because it was a pickup area for hustlers. Later that evening, Saws went home, and John ostensibly went to Bughouse Square. That was the last time Saws saw John, and 3 days later he reported him missing. During the excavation of the Summerdale house, he called John's mother in Michigan and had her send the boy's dental records, which he gave to the police. Saws identified the dental records and John's picture for the jury. Amirani cross-examined Saws about his age, his being 40 and John only 20. He said they stayed together when John was in town, that they weren't related, just friends. Amirani next wanted to know how they met. Saws paused, then related that he met John in a bar on Broadway called Gaffer's. Sam wanted to know more. He asked what kind of bar was Gaffer's, a straight bar or a gay bar? What kind of neighborhood was it located in, gay or straight? Saw said it was a straight neighborhood. Amirani knew he was hedging, lying. You never told the police when you reported him missing that you met him in the gay bar? Saws, turning red in the face, said no, but that he did report him missing. Sam wanted to know how Mr. Saws knew that Bughouse Square was a dangerous place and that gay hustlers hung out there. Just what I heard on TV and the papers. Come on, Mr. Saws. You're talking about gay hustlers, aren't you? Aren't you? Yes. And isn't that where John Prestige wanted to go the night he disappeared? Didn't you drive him there? No. You drove him to Bughouse Square because John said he wanted to go hustle and make money off gays. Didn't you? No. All I'm asking you, Mr. Saws, did you ever give any information in this regard to the Chicago Police Department? Yes, I did. Mr. Saws, are you denying under oath in this court right now that you're denying that you took John Prestige to Bughouse Square to hustle? You didn't take him there to hustle? You deny that under oath? Egan objected. The judge called the two attorneys to the side of the bench and asked Amirani what he was up to. Judge, he's lying. I know it. The state knows it, and I'm laying the groundwork to impeach this witness for perjury. Garippo told Amirani to continue. Amirani renewed the cross-examination by asking Saws if he did, in fact, have a conversation with an Officer Burkhart of the Chicago Police Department on May 11th. Didn't he tell the officer not only about John's disappearance, but that on the day he disappeared, he had dropped John off in the Old Town area, where John intended to make some money from gay males? Saws claimed that was wrong. He had left John at Rush and Oak Streets, admittedly for that same purpose. He wouldn't say whether John was gay, but he admitted putting John's picture in a gay magazine out of Chicago and the missing persons ads. Amirani wanted to know if Saws didn't tell the same police officer that he had met John in a gay bar a couple of weeks before they started living together. Amirani had to ask the judge to instruct the witness to answer the question. Sawes had been nonplussed enough to discredit himself. Again, I was not referred to or associated in any way with the victim. On Friday, February 8th, the state continued with more life and death witnesses. Mrs. Marie Todorick was the mother of Matthew Bowman, 19, of Crystal Lake, Illinois. On July 5, 1977, she drove him to the Crystal Lake train station. He was scheduled in court in Harwood Heights at 9 o'clock on a traffic charge. He called her at 11 that morning to say he was out of court and going into Chicago. She left the same day for a 3-week vacation, and when she returned on July 28th, she reported him missing to the Crystal Lake police. She identified State's Exhibit number 22 as being a picture of her son. Mata only asked her questions following the boy's physical description. The state followed with Mrs. Laura Mortel, Bowman's sister, who had last seen him at her apartment in Chicago on the evening of July 5th. When he left, he told her he was going home. In December of 1978, she heard the publicity about the excavation at Summerdale and called the sheriff's office and sent her brother's dental records. In cross-examination, Amirani asked several questions concerning who Matthew lived with. She said he lived at home with his parents. Had she reported him missing before her mother came home? No. Has she ever given a statement to the police or a description of her brother? As with Michael Bonin, Rick Johnston, William Carroll, and John Zick, I did not know Matthew Bowman. The state never associated me with any of them, nor did they prove their sex motivation theory as being related to their deaths. They continued to give names to bodies found at the house. To this day, those bodies have never been positively identified. Thomas E. Gilroy was called by the state. He was the uncle of Robert Gilroy, 18, who dropped out of sight on September 15, 1977, and was reported missing several days later. He lived with his father and sister in an apartment complex about a half-mile from the Summerdale address. He was an accomplished horseman and left home that day to go for riding practice in Wheeling. He didn't have a car, so he planned to hitchhike. Mr. Gilroy looked at exhibit number 23 and identified it as Robert. Egan had no further questions. I suppose that meant to say Egan. Mata asked just a few questions. Did Robert Gilroy know Paul Downing or Barry Brickman, Roy Arnold or Diana Berner? No. Tasha Malarock? Yes. That was Robert's girlfriend's name. Mata didn't bring out, either then or later in the trial, that the reason the father wasn't in the courtroom was that he didn't want anything to do with his son. His father was a police officer, and, according to the defense investigators, young Robert was a known street hustler, a runaway, and had been in trouble with the law. No connection was established between me and the boy. The state called Dolores Nieder to the stand. Sullivan asked her if she had a son named John Mowry. She said yes, by a previous marriage. He was last seen on September 25th, 1977, and reported to the police as missing on September 29th. After his discharge from the Marines, he lived with his family, but moved into his own apartment when attending Truman College in Chicago and working 2 part-time jobs. The last night Mrs. Nieder saw her son, he had dinner with the family, but couldn't stay overnight because he had to work the next day. A few days later, she received a call from one of her friends saying that he had not been to work the last few days. The last 4 days. She called the police and reported him missing. In December of 1978, Mrs. Nader received a call from the Cook County Sheriff's Office that her son's driver's license had been found at the Summerdale house. She requested the U.S. Marine Corps to send his dental records to the sheriff for identification. Sullivan showed her a jacket, Exhibit 25, and asked if it had belonged to her son. She said it was the type of jacket he had, but she could not be sure it was his. The defense had no questions for her. Nothing connected me with John Mowry. The next witness was Mrs. Norma Nelson, the mother of Russell L. Nelson, 21, who was visiting in Chicago from Cloquet, Minnesota. He had graduated from high school with honors and was studying drafting at the University of Minnesota. While he lived in Minneapolis, he had a steady girlfriend, and they planned to get married and have children. He called his mother on October 17th to wish her a happy birthday and told her he planned to visit Chicago, Canada, and Florida to study the architecture of those places. 2 weeks later, she received a phone call from one of Russell's friends in Chicago who said he hadn't been seen or heard from Russell since October 19th. She filed a missing person report with her local sheriff in Minnesota, who learned that Chicago had had a missing report on him since November 1st. She sent his dental records to the Chicago police. Amirani took the cross-examination. Starting out gently, he asked the name of Russell's girlfriend. Mrs. Nelson didn't want to divulge that, as the girl was making a different life now, and publicity might be emotionally damaging. Did she know Robert Young or Tom Myers? The first name she didn't know. The second one she did was the one who called to report Russell missing. Amirani told her that Robert Young was the man who was traveling with her son. Mrs. Nelson said that although she didn't know Young, she had spoken to him on the telephone when he called from Chicago. He had told her that her son disappeared from a bar they were in called Blinkers. Then he changed the story to say that the boy had disappeared during the next day while alone. Mrs. Nelson was asked about her son's girlfriend, but could only say that she thought that they had gone steady from 1971 until 1974. When he started college, he lived in a territorial home with another man. He also had an apartment, but she didn't know if that was shared by the man from the terrible home. Sam asked if she knew what kind of bar Blinkers was. She thought it was a disco bar. He asked if she had ever heard him mention the Washington Park or Bughouse Square districts of Chicago. She couldn't recall. Amirani returned to Robert Young. Was she curious about the different stories he told her? First saying he had been with Russell when he disappeared, then saying he hadn't. She said, "I can't understand how Russ could disappear one night and disappear the next day also." She went on to say that Robert Young, who claimed to have reported her son missing, had been calling her 2 or 3 times a week, threatening her for money. He told her he knew Russell had $2,000 in traveler's checks on him, and that he had some of Russell's IDs, which he could use to cash those traveler's checks. Sam was trying to be nice to the woman. She was naive about her son's private life. Our investigators learned that on the night he disappeared, Russell was seen in gay bars with known street hustlers, and this Robert Young may have ripped him off. Sam didn't want to distress her further with investigative reports showing that her son lived with a gay man while in Minneapolis, or that his friend Tom Myers had a different account of what happened to Russell and the missing $2,000. Prosecutor Egan called to the stand Mrs. Joyce Winch, the mother of Robert Winch, 16, who was last seen in Kalamazoo, Michigan, on November 10, 1977, and reported missing the next day. Mr. Egan elicited that Mrs. Winch had 5 children and was divorced. Robert was living in a foster home because of the problems he was having, and was home only on weekends for family visits. On Friday, November 10th, he had been home and left to go to a friend's house. When he didn't return by 9 o'clock, she called the friend who told her that Robert had left with another boy to go to California. She never saw him again. She sent his dental records to Cook County Sheriff's Office, along with x-rays of injuries he had sustained in the past. She identified Exhibit Number 28, a picture of her son. Mata asked very few questions. Mrs. Winch said that Robert had lived in the foster home several months after a court order had been obtained. One of his friends told her that he had gone to California with another friend. Our investigators learned that Robert Winch had been in trouble with his family and with the law. He and his friends were reputed to be straight hustlers, and some were flagrant homosexuals. No connection was made between that boy and myself. Mrs. Albina Bowling took the stand next. Kunkel asked if she had a son named Tommy Bowling. Yes. He was 20, married, and had a son named Timmy. The marriage had been a double-ring ceremony, and she identified his wedding ring for Kunkel. On November 18th, 1977, he left her house, but called back at 11 that night, saying that he was in a bar watching television. She thought he would go home after that, but that was the last time she ever heard his voice. He was reported missing 2 days later. In February of 1978, she obtained his dental records and sent them to the Cook County Sheriff's Office at their request. Kunkel showed her Tommy's picture, which she identified. Mata handled the cross-examination. He wanted to know why her son called so late at night. Mrs. Mata said it was because her husband was sick and Tommy wanted to see how he was doing. Mata asked what bar he had called from. She didn't know, but he frequented bars on North Clark Street. Did she know Don Gibber? Yes. He was the boy's friend. According to defense investigators, Don Gibber said that Tommy Bowling was a male hustler in the Newtown area, frequenting gay bars. He said Tommy had a police record, and he was known to rip off people he hustled. I never met Tommy Bowling. His remains were found beneath a house on Summerdale. The state presented nothing that even hinted that the Bowling boy and I had ever met. Mrs. Pearl Talsma stepped into the witness box, and for the state, Attorney James Varga came forward. Mrs. Talsma was the mother of David Paul Talsma, 19, reported missing on December 14, 1977. He had been living at home until he was last seen on December 9th, when he told her he was going that night to a rock concert in Hammond, Indiana. She had checked around with his friends and even with her mother in Florida before reporting his disappearance. He was in the Marine Reserves, and she obtained his dental records from the Marines in October of 1979 to give to the sheriff's office. Mata, for the defense, asked if David lived at home. Yes. What time had he left on December 9th to go to the concert? Around 6:30 p.m. Mata then asked Mrs. Talsma if she remembered talking to him, Mata, on the phone. She did. He asked H. she had written a letter to John Gacy at the county jail. She said yes, she did write to me. When she was asked what she wrote in that letter, Sullivan objected and Garippo sustained it. Mata asked if she made any representations as to his client's mental state, and again Garippo sustained Sullivan's objection. What Mrs. Talsma had written me, that the state didn't want presented in court, was that she didn't hold anything against me. Her son David was no angel, and what happened to him could not be held against me. She understood what I was going through and felt sorry for me. She said she realized that the mental state I must have been in afforded me no control over what had happened, and that she forgave me. I turned the letter over to my attorneys. Mata requested the court's permission to call her as a defense witness, that the state should make her available. Kunkel shouted, "Absolutely not." And Morani said, "I don't think they have any choice." Garippo had both counsel come to a sidebar out of the hearing of the jury. He made it known that he didn't want any legal arguments in front of the jury. If the defense wanted a request of the witness to make, then make it, but, looking at Kunkel, "I don't want arguments going on in open court." To Amirani, "Now, are you going to call her as a witness, and in what regards?" "We may, about the letter she sent to my client stating that she forgave him, and just about her general forgiveness." "It may be possible. We will see, if it gets that far." In the aggravation and mitigation hearing, transcript pages 321 to 322. The next witness was rolled out in a wheelchair, wearing a neck brace and holding crutches. Mary Jo Paulus had been severely injured the week before in an auto accident, and had been released from the hospital earlier that day in order to testify. Amirani, seeing her discomfort, offered to stipulate to her testimony, but Sullivan wouldn't allow it. After some preliminary questions, Sullivan asked her if she knew William Kindred. She said yes. She had begun dating him on July 28, 1977, and did so until he disappeared on January 28, 1978. She had seen him every day during that time. The day he disappeared was the day they had planned to get married. She hadn't reported him missing until February 16th, when she and his mother went together to the police station. In June of 1979, after the discovery of bodies on Summerdale, she went to the police station and identified a chain with 2 medals, which had been a gift from her to William in January of 1978. Sullivan asked if she had ever met John Gacy. She said yes, but she had trouble picking me out in the courtroom. She claimed that she had met me at the Good Luck Lounge on Elston Avenue late in 1977, that I had done a sketch of her on a bar napkin and gave it to her. She knew it was me because I signed it. When asked if she still had this drawing, she said no. Then she testified that she had talked with me a second time in November of 1977 at the Good Luck Lounge, that I had bought her a drink, then invited her to party at my house. She claimed to have seen me 5 times during 1977 and 1978. Sullivan ended his examination by having her identify a picture of William Kindred. Amirani was keyed up. He sat beside me at the defense table and mumbled to me that she was lying. Mata cross-examined, starting out with general questions. She was 19. She met William Kindred on July 28, 1977. She couldn't remember the date they became engaged. He had been unable to buy her an engagement ring. Asked about her physical condition, she couldn't describe her injuries, but she was taking medication. Mata asked when she first met me. She couldn't recall the day nor the month, just that it was 1977 at the Good Luck Lounge. Did she know an Ed Hefner from the Good Luck Lounge? She never heard of him. Ed Hefner was the bartender and manager of the Good Luck Lounge. Mata asked how many times she had been there. She said more than 10 times. Did Miss Paulus know the owner or the bartender there? No. Mata asked if she knew different people who frequented the place, including David Cram and Michael Rossi. None of the names meant anything to her. Mata mentioned the name Larry Weedle. She said, "Yes, I know him." And Morani brought out that Larry Weedle had seen William Kindred after she had last seen him. She didn't respond. Did she tell the police that she was the last person to see William Kindred? I don't recall. So, in fact, you were not the last person to see him alive. Mata asked her to describe William Kindred. She said he weighed 155, was about 5'8", and had a brunette hair. Then she changed the answer to ash-brown hair. Didn't you tell the police that he had dirty blonde hair? As far as I can remember, yes. Then she blurted out, "Can you please stop? I would like Mr. Gacy to stop staring at me." I raised my head, and everyone was looking at me. Judge Carupo answered, "Miss Paulus, just answer the questions. He wasn't looking at you. I was looking right at Mr. Gacy." Mata continued, "What neighborhood did Billy Kindred frequent?" "Broadway and Diversey." "Well, he lived in Newtown. Where was that?" "Diversey, Clark and Broadway." Mata's last questions were about her talking with defense investigator Hollis. Why hadn't she mentioned to him the drawing she claimed I did for her? Why hadn't she mentioned that I invited her to a party at my house? As far as we were concerned, all this was new and very imaginative testimony. What Mata wanted to bring out was that she was not engaged to William Kindred. They had just been friends. There was no sketch made on a napkin by me. Napkins were not provided in that bar. They used coasters. If she had been in the Good Luck Lounge as much as she claimed, she would have unavoidably met Edward Hefner. He was always there and made it his strict business to meet everyone who came in more than a couple of times. Because Edward Hefner left that job to work for PDM in April of 1977, I had no reason to go back to the Good Luck Lounge. And I wasn't in there in November of 1977 when she claimed I invited her to a party. I had never met the girl and did not know William Kindred. Our investigator learned from Larry Weedle that 19-year-old William Kindred was last seen on or about January 15th, 1978, and that he wasn't reported missing until February 16th. Weedle confirmed that Kindred had a police record for hustling gays, and told us that he and Kindred went both ways sexually. They personally and professionally indulged bisexual appetites. He also told us that Kindred was not engaged to Mary Jo Paulus. She didn't even know the address where her beloved fiancé lived. William Kindred's mother refused to testify that he was her son. The state showed no link between Kindred and me. I believe that the only way to present the testimony for the next witness for the state is verbatim, nothing omitted, changed from the trial transcripts from pages 345 to 356. The witness appeared to be an attractive young Oriental woman. She wore a rich blouse, peasant skirt, and high leather boots. Egan conducted the direct examination. Would you tell us your name, please, and spell your last name? Danita Ganson. Ganzon. How old are you? 33. What is your business or occupation? I'm a registered nurse. Miss Ganson, calling your attention to 1977, specifically May of 1977, did you have occasion to meet a person you later knew was Timothy O'Rourke? Yes. Did you, subsequent to May of 1977, become friends with Timothy O'Rourke? Yes, I did. Now, calling your attention to August of 1977, did Timothy O'Rourke have occasion to move in with you where you were living? Yes. How long did Timothy O'Rourke live with you? I would say about 2 or 3 months. Now, did he live with you until the fall of 1977? Yes. During the time that he lived with you, did he ever talk to you about a construction man that he knew from the Northwest Side? Mr. Amirani. Objection as to during that time. The court. Sustained. Mr. Egan again. Now, did Timothy O'Rourke have any particular marks or tattoos that you knew of? Yes. Would you describe that for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury? It was a tattoo on the left arm. Tim Lee. Tim Lee? Yes. Would you explain that, please? Well, he was a very avid fan of Bruce Lee. I asked him one day why he had the tattoo, Tim Lee, because I am a avid fan of Bruce Lee. Bruce Lee, the karate expert in the films? Yes. Now, calling your attention to the fall of 1977, the last time you saw him, did you have conversation with him that night? Yes. Where did this conversation take place? Well, it took place in front of the house where we were living together on Dover and Lawrence. What time of night did that take place? It was about 11:30 to 11:45. Were you getting home from work at that time? I just got off work. After that conversation, did you go anywhere? Yes. Where did you go? Well, he said he was going to buy... Objection! Overruled. Go ahead. He said he was going to buy cigarettes. I said, what time will you be back? He said, I will be back at 1. Where did you go? I went upstairs. Is that the last time you ever saw Timothy O'Rourke? Yes. Now, Mr. Mata, may we have a sidebar, Judge? Whereupon the following transpired outside the hearing of the jury. The court. Go ahead, let me see it. Mr. Egan. That is the photograph. For the record, she's a registered nurse, and I've shown her the picture at noon today. I asked her would she be willing to look at it. She didn't lose her composure. She said she'd be willing to look at it in court. Mata. Are we talking about this going into evidence? The court. We don't know. Egan. The photograph will not be admitted. Mata. You are not going to seek to introduce it then. That is all I wanted to know. Whereupon the following proceeding were had in the presence and hearing of the jury. Egan. Miss Witness, I would show you at this time a photograph which is marked People's Exhibit number 34 for identification. I ask you to look at that photograph. Do you recognize what is depicted in that photograph? Yes. What is that? Tim Lee's arm. Is that the arm that has the tattoo that you just described? Yes. Now, I also show you exhibit number 35 for identification. Do you recognize who is depicted in that photograph? That is Tim O'Rourke. Does that show what he looked like the last time you saw him? Yes. When you last saw him, was he alive and well? Would you rephrase that question? When you last saw him, was he alive and well, and in good health? Yes. No further questions. Cross-examination by Mr. Amirani. Miss Ganson. Is it Miss or Mrs.? Miss Ganson. How long has your name been Donita? Since... Objection. I don't see how this is relevant. That is relevant. The objection is up to the court. The objection is overruled. How long has your name been Donita? Since March 1977. What was it before that? Dawn Ganson. Dawn? Yes. What was your name when you met Timothy O'Rourke? He started knowing me as Donita. He knew you as Donita? Yes. You say Don is the long name of that Donald? What name did you have, Don? Donald? Don. Don? Yes. When did you meet Timothy O'Rourke? May 1977. How long have you been a female? I don't see the relevancy here, Judge. I will object. Overruled. How long have you been a female? I'm in the process of being a woman. So when you met Timothy, you were not female, were you? That is right. Where did you meet him? I met him at a party. Where was the party? The party was on Broadway and Surf Street. Who else was at the party? There was too many people at the party. How tall was Tim O'Rourke? About 5'5". What color was his hair? Black hair. Black hair. Yes. And how much did he weigh? I would say he weighed between 130 and 140. Where was the last time you saw him? He was in front of our house on Dover and Lawrence. You were living with him? Yes. Did you plan to marry him? He was just a friend. So, you were not in love with him? Objection. How is that relevant? Sustained. Were you in love with him? Objection. Sustained. May I approach the bench? I was not in love with him. Did you give a statement to Investigator Lawrence from the Grundy County Sheriff's Police Department in regards to Tim Lee? Repeat the question. Do you remember giving a statement to an officer from the Grundy County Sheriff's Police Department in regards to Tim Lee? I never gave any statement that I was in love with him. Did you give a statement to Investigator Lawrence from the Grundy County Sheriff's Department? I can't seem to understand what he's trying to ask me. Judge, I think the question is clear. Did she give a statement to Investigator Lawrence? Did I what? Did you talk to an Investigator Lawrence from the Grundy County Sheriff's Police? No, I did not. Did you talk to investigator William Collins from the Cook County Sheriff's Department? I don't remember. Maybe I can refresh your memory. You don't remember at all? I don't. Maybe you can take a look at that. Maybe it will refresh your memory. Kunkel. Judge, can we have these papers marked from time to time? The defense refers to documents. They are not exhibits, so we may know where they are later. All right. In the future, mark it as an exhibit. Fine, Judge. Have you had a chance to look at that? Do you remember talking to them now? I talk to so many men, I don't give those names. I'm going to mark this defense exhibit number 1 for identification. Okay, Miss Ganson. I will show you what I have marked as defendant's exhibit number 1 for identification. Do you remember ever speaking to Investigator Collins from the Cook County Sheriff's Police or Investigator Lawrence from the Grundy County Sheriff's Police on January 10th? I remember talking to 4 people that came to my residence. I cannot remember any names. I'm not good at remembering names. Do you remember telling them that Timothy O'Rourke said he was in love with you? Yes, he was in love with me. And you told that to the investigators? Yes, I did. Have you had the sex change operation yet? Objection sustained. No, I haven't. That means you are still a man. Objection again sustained. You don't have to answer. Say it again. You don't have to answer the questions. Do you know a person named Busick? No. Did you ever hear of a bar? Did you ever hear of a bar called Blinkers? Yes. What kind of bar is Blinkers? Objection to the form of the question. She may answer. What kind of bar? It is predominantly a gay bar. No further questions. Egan. Nothing further. Thank you, Miss Ganson. Timothy O'Rourke was 21 when he disappeared in the fall of 1977. He was never reported missing to the police. He was found in the Des Plaines River on June 30th, 1978. The cause of death was prescribed as drowning, accidental drowning with no signs of trauma found on the body. Investigators could not find any of O'Rourke's family. He had a police record. I never met Timothy O'Rourke, nor was it implied by the state that I did. The next witness was Francisco Landigan. Mr. Kunkel handled the direct questioning. Mr. Landigan was the father of Frank Landigan, 19, who disappeared on November 4th, 1978, but was never reported missing. Mr. Landigan had seen Frank on November 3rd, 1978, in the lockup at Belmont and Western Avenue, while he was being held on a charge of battery against his live-in girlfriend, Mary Jo Romero. Frank was bonded out that night or early the next morning. Mr. Landigan saw his son for the last time around 2 or 3 o'clock that morning outside a tavern. Frank said he was looking for Mary Jo. When he didn't see his son for several days, Mr. Landigan became worried and called several Chicago hospitals. Kunkel showed him photo exhibit number 36, which he identified as his son. Mata handled the cross-examination, bringing out only that Jimmy Dupree put up Frank's bond. Frank, Mary Jo, and Jimmy shared an apartment together at Winthrop and Foster Avenue. Mr. Landigan repeated when he last saw his son, and that he did not file a missing persons report. None of Frank's family did. Our investigators talked with Frank's sister Carolyn, who told them that Frank left home several times and had been in and out of trouble with the law. No evidence linked us together. Alberto Mazzara was the next witness to take the stand. Robert Egan took the direct examination. Alberto was the father of James Mazzara, 20. James lived at the family home in Elmwood Park, Illinois. He was last seen by his father the day after Thanksgiving, 1978. While they kept a bedroom made up for James, he was frequently gone for days at a time. But they didn't worry much. James had several jobs, but he wasn't working that winter. Kunkel showed him photo exhibit number 37, and Mazzara identified it as his son. He asked if James had any nicknames. Yes, they called his son Mojo. Cross-examination was by Robert Mata. Did Mr. Mazzara know Andy Kopna? No. When asked if he knew James's friends, Mr. Mazzara said that he knew a few of them. But no, I don't recall an Andy. Mata asked why he didn't report his son missing to the police. He spoke in slightly broken English. No, I can't report a missing person if he is 20. He is free to go out of the house any time he wants. James would go away many times. 2 days, 3 days. He would be gone with his friends. I would never report him missing. Mata asked Mazzara if he knew where 2717 73rd Avenue was. A couple blocks away from where I live. Andy Kopna lives at 2717 73rd Avenue. Are you aware that a week after you last saw your son James, Mr. Mazzara, that Andy Kopna saw him at a concert? But Mr. Mazzara still would not say he knew Andy Kopna as his son's friend. The state objected to that point being emphasized. No further questions. Thank you very much, sir. Mata closed. The state never asked for dental records in the Mazzara case, or for any other identifying clues. He was found in the Des Plaines River. The cause of death was listed as drowning. The state tried to prevent Mata from bringing out that a week after James's father had last seen his son, a friend, Andy Kopna, saw James at a rock concert. It would enfeeble their stance if James had been seen after he was listed as missing. Defense investigators found that James Mazzara was involved in drugs, that he hung around Bughouse Square, and that he was gay. He was no stranger to the police. There was no association shown with me. The last witness of the day was Elizabeth Peast, the mother of Robert Peast. The state based its whole case on its theory about what happened to this one victim. Robert Peast was 15 the night he vanished while working at a drugstore in Des Plaines. The state proposed that he went out to the store's parking lot to talk with the contractor, me, about a better-paying job. He disappeared that night, never returning to the store, and was reported to the police as missing the following day. No one said I talked to him inside the store. No one saw me with him outside the store. His body was found in the Des Plaines River 50 miles from the Summerdale house. But the state's assumption that I picked him up outside the drugstore was the thread it used to weave a bizarre picture of me luring 33 young men and boys to my Summerdale office, murdering them in a grotesque ritual, then burying them under the house. The state led the jurors to believe that I sexually assaulted them after pretending to show them handcuff and rope tricks. The state deluded to the jury, the judge, the public, you, into believing that every one of these boys were the quintessence of wholesome American youth. I commiserate with their families, and I find their fates deplorable. But too many of them were not the stuff of Eagle Scouts or the bright blossoms of American youth. Some were arrested street hustlers, predators upon gays, druggers, young men who comprised the offbeat elements of society. The investigations testified to that. In direct examination by Sullivan, Mrs. Peast said that her son Robert was last seen at Neeson's pharmacy. He was due to get off at 9, and that she was waiting to take him home. It was her birthday, and the family had arranged a celebration. She said that she was later told that shortly after quitting time that night, a contractor named John Gacy mentioned that his firm was hiring, and that I had offered one of the owners $5.50 an hour to come and work for PDM contractors. That was true, but I was kidding with the store's co-owner, Philip Torf, and at no time did I make an actual offer of a job to anyone working at that store. Mrs. Peast said that while she was talking with her son, he said he had to go outside for a few minutes to talk with a contractor. He did not say John Gacy, nor could anyone be found to testify that he went out to talk to me. Mrs. Peast was inclined to give rather long narrative answers, so Amirani and Mata objected. Most of her rambling was insignificant hearsay, but they wanted to avoid a precedent. The attorneys were called to the side of the bench, outside the hearing of the jurors. Mata: "We're going to give far away here, Judge. I mean, the stuff isn't relevant or material. The state has one question left to ask, and that is if she has ever seen him again." Garippo: "What you are asking is not hearsay, I realize, but we can't just turn the witness loose to say, what do you know about this case? You can't have her say people were running all over the place." Sullivan: "Judge, I have asked her where she went. That was my last question. They objected to it. Well, she did. Mrs. Peast is going to say that the family did their own type of investigation, but it is way over at the Gacy house." Garippo asked if Mrs. Peast went over to the Gacy house. Sullivan said she did not. Garippo: "You can't have Mrs. Peast say people were running all over the place unless she was there. That's hearsay." Sullivan, not liking the ruling, said, "Fine. If the defense wish us to call the rest of the family, we will be more than glad to." Mata: "How is that relevant, Judge?" Sullivan: "Don't tell us what the witnesses can say." The argument went back and forth as to what Mrs. Peast was going to be allowed to say. Finally, Judge Garippo said, "I am sustaining the objection, so you are violating Rule 1. She has already testified that the family went out looking for Robert, and that she goes back to the police station the next day." The attorneys left the bench, and Sullivan continued, asking her about dental records. Mrs. Peast said that they had been turned over to the sheriff's office. Then she identified exhibit number 38, a blue parka with a label reading Pacific Trail Sportswear, and said it belonged to her son. She also identified the state's picture of Robert. Sullivan asked if she had been advised on April 9th, 1979, that her son's body had been retrieved from the Des Plaines River. Weeping, she said yes. The state had no further questions. Amirani, for the defense, had no questions. Judge Garippo talked with the jurors, informing them that we would meet the next morning, Saturday at 10, but there would only be a morning session. Do not discuss the believability of any witness, certainly not what your verdict would be. Again, people might make inquiries of you as to the progress of the case. Avoid any such contact with anyone. Have a good evening, and we will see you tomorrow at 10 o'clock. February 9th, 1980. Garippo had promised a jury selection that the trial would be in session 6 days a week. This was the first Saturday. The state presented its first witness of the day, Kimberly Byers. Sullivan handled the direct examination. Asked how she knew Robert Peast, Miss Byers stated that she worked with him at the Nissan drugstore in Des Plaines. She said that she first saw me at the drugstore between 5 and 5:20 on December 11th, while I was taking tape measurements of the store's aisles. She said she had no conversation with me because I was mostly in the back with the owners. Later that evening, she was working the cash register by the front door of the store, and Robert Peast was stocking shelves. She was shown exhibit number 39, a picture of Peast, and identified him. Sullivan showed her exhibit number 38, Peast's jacket, which she identified. She had been wearing it in the store during the time she was filling out a personal photo reprint order, and when she finished, she put the receipt from the order into the pocket of that jacket. Then she identified the order envelope and the receipt. Sullivan then moved the time frame to 8:50 that evening, asking who came into the store at that time. Miss Byers stated that Mrs. Peast came in to pick up Rob. Between 8:50 and 9, Robert asked Miss Byers to watch the register. Peast said he was going to talk to the contractor guy about a job. He'll be right back. This was the last time Kim Byers saw Robert Peast. And Morani had no cross-examination. I couldn't understand why. Byers had seen me earlier in the store about 5:30, but they had not put me with Peast. From 5:30 to 8:50 is 3 hours and 20 minutes. There could have been 10 contractors in the place during that much time. Robert Peast went out to see the contractor guy. No name. The next witness was also a Nissan employee, Linda Mertes. Egan began the direct by asking her what position she held at the store. Mertes answered that she was the store manager and that she had been talking with John Gacy at 4:30 the afternoon of December 11th in the pharmacy area. She said we had talked about Mike Rossi, who had worked on the remodeling for PDM some 2 years before. She asked me how Mike was doing. She remembered how he had complained about his $3 pay. She said I told her he was doing much better, now making $7, like most of my employees. She claimed that Robert Peast was standing around during this conversation, and that, jokingly, she turned to him and said, "Hey, Rob, you want a job?" Peast didn't comment. No comment by him? No comment by Rob or Gacy. Miss Mertes then stated she left the store at 6 and returned at 7. I was still there. She left again to go shopping and returned at 8:45 and was positive of the time. When she returned the last time, she noticed a pickup out front marked with PDM contractors on its side. Egan showed her exhibits numbered 45, 46, 47, 48, and 49, and asked her to identify them. Miss Mertes claimed that they were of the same truck she saw that night. When she went back to the store, she said she saw me, Phil Torf, and Kim Byers. She knew Rob Peast was working the cash register at the front because she paid him for some medication when she left. Robert Mata took the cross-examination, first asking what she knew about Michael Rossi, and for a description of him. Then he asked about the truck she she had seen outside the store that night and about its color. Black, with white lettering. Mata was looking at the state's exhibits numbered 45 through 49. Did you give a statement to Officer Piquel? Yes. Didn't you tell Piquel that you saw a red truck with black letters? Yes, I did. Miss Mertes. Now you say it's a black truck with white letters. Because I see what's color. What? My God. Because that's what color it is in the photos. Mata made sure she repeated the fact that the night of December 11th she did think and did say that it was a red truck with white letters. No, I told the officer it was a red truck with black lettering. Even after changing the color of the letters, Mertes went back to her original conviction of it being a red truck in black letters. Mata then brought out that, in giving the police her statement, Miss Mertes said she had seen an earth-tone van in front of the Nissan pharmacy that she thought was suspicious, parked right beside the PDM truck. The Des Plaines police never probed that clue, and the state tried to delete that from her testimony. The rest of her testimony referred to my character as being friendly, responsible, and reliable. The bailiff called Philip Richard Torf, and again Robert Egan did the direct examination. Egan started out showing Torf to be one of the owners of the Nissan pharmacy in Des Plaines, the one who requested 2 days before the 11th of December that I come to the store. Torf explained that he called me to give him an assessment of how the store was put together and to quote a price for remodeling changes. Egan brought out that I had done earlier remodeling at the store. Torf stated that it was a year before and that I had done the work in a week's time. Egan asked him the purpose in contacting John Gacy. Torf answered that it was because I had been involved in its construction. Before getting down to the business of evaluating the proposed work, we talked for an hour and a half. Egan asked if Robert Peast was working at the store at the time. Torf said that Peast came to work at 6 o'clock that evening, adding that he was making $2.85 an hour. Torf answered questions about the cost of the remodeling, that my tentative quote was $1,600. He wanted to reduce the cost by doing the work himself with the help of his employees and pay me just to supervise the job. He mentioned that I had asked questions about his employees, and Egan wanted him to say that I was talking about Robert Peast. But Torf insisted that we only discussed the employees in general. Egan did get Torf to say that I mentioned using high school boys for some of the work I contracted. According to Torf, I left the store the first time at 7. Egan showed him exhibit number 50, and Torf identified it as the appointment book which I had left in the store that night. Torf said that I returned to the store between 8 and 8:30 to pick up the book, and then we talked again about construction changes. He claimed that he did not see me leave the store the second time, nor did he see Robert Peast in the store. He himself was in the pharmacy area. When Peast was reported missing by his family, Torf called me and got the answering machine. Later that night, my name was mentioned in a conversation with the Peast family. Cross-examination was carried by Amirani, but it was like he was filling the blanks that Egan had forgotten to get answers for the state. Amirani asked if, while doing the earlier remodeling, I had ever approached him or made sexually suggestive passes at him, or exhibit anything that he would consider unusual. "Never," Torf responded. Amirani asked who else worked on that job. Torf ran off the names of several of the men, including Michael Rossi and David Cram. Amirani wanted to know how I acted around my crew. Like a boss. You got the job done. Before long, Amirani got Torf to say he was skeptical of me, but called me back twice for advice anyway, because he trusted my opinion in regard to remodeling. I sat at the defense table wondering whose side Amirani was on. Instead of destroying the state's case, he seemed to want to establish doubt about my decorum. Continuing, Amirani asked what kind of mood I was in when I came into the store on December 11th, and if my humor made him laugh. Yeah, oh yeah, he made me laugh. Was Mr. Gacy authentic when he joked around and made you laugh? Or did you feel he was phony? How did you feel about him? I had no reason to doubt him. Amirani got back on track by asking if I had talked with Robert Peast or approached him. Torf said he did not see me talk to or approach Peast during the time I was in the store. Amirani, I felt, then began laying the groundwork for his insanity defense by flirting with the psychological. In the 1976 remodeling work, did Gacy seem proud of his work? I didn't find that in his speech. Did Gacy seem like a braggart? Did he brag about it? He boasted about how he got things done, and he did. Somehow Torf wasn't giving Amirani the answers he was looking for, but he kept trying. He done things quickly. Would you say he was an ambitious type person? Yes. Then in a fast series of questions, Amirani asked if I had caused any trouble on the job, broke anything intentionally, hit or hurt anyone in his presence. Torf answered no. He had never seen me act tough with my employees, just that I was the boss and got the job done. That Gacy was a pretty demanding kind of guy when he got the work done? No. He told them that he wanted what he wanted done, and they would do it. When asked if he had ever seen me outside of work, Torf answered, yes, at the Christmas tree lot, and again when he was in the hospital. He said he visited me once in the hospital when he was working in the neighborhood. No, I didn't seem like I was happy to be in the hospital like Amirani suggested. Amirani went back to my moods and work habits. Torf said, he hustled. I've always known him to be working. He was exclusively, compulsively business with me. The state proceeded with George Konieczny, a police officer working in Des Plaines. Kunkel established that he worked the front desk of the station from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. and was there that December night when Peast's parents arrived. He took down the pertinent information regarding their missing son. In giving that information, they mentioned the names of Mr. Philip Torf and Mr. John Gacy. The officer advised them to go home, and they would shortly be contacted by the juvenile department. If they didn't hear by morning, they should call back. Other than his initial conversation with the Peasts, his phone call to Mr. Torf, preparing the report and forwarding it to members of his department, Mr. Konieczny had nothing to do with the investigation. The defense had no questions. Officer Ronald Adams took the stand next, with Kunkel doing the direct. Mr. Adams' position with the police department on December 12th was an investigator assigned to the Youth Bureau. After talking with the Peast family that morning, he called Phil Torf, then called me at the office. He said I was very cooperative. On December 13th, he put out a lead message to all law enforcement in the state. That afternoon, he cleaned out Robert Peast's school locker. He also participated in the first search at 8213 Summerdale. He stated that he did not find anything there himself, but during that search, a Maine West High School ring was found with the initials JAS inside it. He checked the school and was given two names, one of them being John A. Zick, who was listed as missing. On December 16th, he and Sergeant Piquel interviewed Richard Raphael, who said that John Gacy worked with him. On December 18th, he was present when the police talked with David Cram, a Gacy employee. On December 20th, he interviewed Robert Zimmerman. Kunkel was skipping around with unlinked questions. On December 23rd, Officer Adams said that he, along with some other officers, transported me to the Cook County Jail, and that he heard Officer Tovar advise me of my rights in the car. He said I had a conversation with him while traveling there, but Kunkel didn't have him explain what that conversation was about. Kunkel had him identify exhibit number 18, the Main West ring with the initials JAS. Amirani had no questions. Again, I couldn't believe that he would freely let Kunkel bring in hearsay and erroneous statements from other people. He didn't try to discredit any of the statements of people Adams had interviewed. In discovery, he received copies of these statements, and our investigation checked them out. He had a long time to prepare a rebuttal. From his own interviews, Sam knew that many of those statements had been altered. Obvious contradictions. For example, Adams interviewed Richard Raphael, and he knew he was my business partner. But in the statement that I worked for Raphael as a foreman, he did it again on the stand. Trial transcripts, page 486. Egan. Was Raphael an acquaintance or an associate of John Gacy? Adams. Gacy was the superintendent for Mr. Raphael. With the background information Amirani had, he could have taken Adams apart by showing one such distortion after another, giving less credibility to Adams' testimony. Sergeant James Piquel was the next witness called. He was a plainclothes officer at the time of the investigation. Sullivan informed the court that Piquel was the man who took my first oral and written statement on December 13th. Piquel talked with me in order to keep me there, while Gosenchak was trying to get a search warrant. Sullivan called on Officer Piquel to say that he had gone to Northbrook, Illinois, Police Department to collect information about my having an old assault arrest. 2. He was the officer who came to my house on December 12th with Lieutenant Gosenchak. He said that they came to the front door and, while they received no answer, thought they saw movement. When they came around to the back door, they saw me sitting inside, knocked on the door, and I let them in. Then he asked who it was that pulled up in my driveway while they were coming around the back door of the house on December 13th. Piquel stated that it was a young man named Rossi in a PDM van, and they had him wait outside while they came in to talk with me. Sullivan, wanting what Piquel would say emphasized, had him come down from the stand and use the pointer to show where the front door of the house was on exhibit number 1, then point out the route they took to get to the back door and where he first saw me sitting. Then he showed how inside the house they were led to the back of the house. Piquel returned to the witness chair and was asked about the conversation between himself, Gosenchak, and me. Mata objected at this point, and a sidebar was held. Amirani objected to Sullivan's going into Piquel's conversation with the defendant regarding the investigation because it was an exculpatory statement. Mata. If there is something involved, Judge, I believe that the state has to establish that they, in fact, informed my client of his rights. Garippo denied the objection. There is no necessity. Number 1, there is no motion to suppress. Number 2, he's not in custody, so no question about it. Sullivan repeated the question. Piquel related the conversation between the three of us with long narrative answers. They had gone by my house in regard to the missing Peace boy to see if I could assist them. I said I didn't have any information, but I would be more than happy to help. Sullivan inquired if I hadn't been willing to go to the police station with them. Piquel said that I would, but there had been a death in my family, and I had to stay home to receive phone calls. I was willing, he recalled, to give a written statement at the station at a later time. Piquel stated that they waited while I made a phone call, then after completing it said that I told them I was still busy. During the time I was on the phone, Michael Rossi was allowed to come into the house. They finally left after I agreed to come down to the station later. Sullivan wanted it told whether I had gone down to the station at the end of the hour. Piquel replied that I called the station at 11 and told them I was running late, but I would still be in. He waited until midnight, and Kosenchak waited until 1 without me showing up. The next day, December 13th, Kosenchak told him I was coming in and he wanted him to take a statement from me. When I arrived, I was escorted to the detective bureau where we talked. Then he had me write out our conversation as a statement. Sullivan went through that statement asking questions along the way. He wanted to know if I had any conversation with any youth while at Nissan's. Piquel said he knew of no conversation I had with any youth. He pointed out that my second departure from Nissan's was shortly before 9 p.m. Sullivan asked if I had mentioned Michael Rossi while at the station. Piquel replied that I had told Mr. Torf that Rossi was still working for me and that I was paying him $400 a week. Mr. Gacy was paying him that much? Yes. Sullivan wanted to know what kind of involvement I had in the community. Piquel said I told him that I was a lighting district commissioner for Norwood Park Township, a Democratic precinct captain, and that I was instrumental in putting on the Polish Day Parade in Chicago. Then Sullivan asked about my construction business, my marital situation, and about my having been a chef before going into construction. None of this was in that first statement I had given at the station, in spite of its insignificance that was all added on, but my attorney sat back and let Piquel rattle on. Next, Sullivan showed Piquel Exhibit number 51, introduced as the statement I had made that day at the station, and asked Piquel to read it. Emirani had no objection. Before going into that, however, Sullivan asked what I did after writing it out. Piquel said he asked me to wait for Lieutenant Kosenchak, and that I was allowed to use the telephone since my pager had buzzed several times. Later in the day, Piquel was told by Kosenchak that I was to be detained while they tried to get a search warrant. Sullivan then brought out via Piquel that at 4 o'clock that day a search warrant was finally signed by Judge Marvin Peters. Sullivan didn't follow through on having Piquel read the statement. He had no further questions. Before Emirani started his cross-examination, he said, "We have no questions as far as foundation, authenticity, and so forth of the statement. We have no objection. So if Mr. Sullivan wants to publish it," Garippo asked Sullivan if he wanted to. "Yes, sir," he said, and turned to Piquel. "Will you please read the entire document to the jury?" Emirani went into cross-examination when Piquel finished reading. Going back to the visit Piquel made to the house on December 12th. "Did you force your way into the house?" "No. Mr. Gacy admitted us."